Chapter 19. In the bar of the George, what should he find as the topic of vehement conversation but Bradley again? I don't care how much glory he's brought to England. He'll still have to pay for his pints in here. Not likely now, is it? Poor bugger. Howbeit, he was in, don't forget, with Macclesfield and that gang that stole the 11 days right off the calendar. God may wait, for the living God's a beast of prey who waits, and may wait for years, yet at last, when least expected, he springs. Thank you, Rev. Now, when do I get to sell ale in your chapel? Sunday be all right. Nay, attend him. The battlefields we know, situated in earth's 3 dimensions, have also their counterparts in time. And if the popish gain advantage in time's reckoning, they may easily carry the day. Why, that they've had the day and the night as well, since 52, when we were all taken over onto Roman whores' time, and lost 11 days' worth of our own. Mason pretends to examine his shoe buckle, trying not to sigh too heavily. Of the many classics of idiocy, this idiocy of the 11 days has joined the select handful that may never be escaped. Some have held this grudge for 10 years, not so long as grudges go. Now that misfortune has overtaken Bradley's life, do they feel avenged at last? He listens to the weary hymn once more, as he has from his father, at this moment but walking miles distant, still asleep, soon to wake. So what the devil is your dear friend Dr. Bradley up to, he and his protectors? Stealing 11 days? Can that be done? It seemed his father had really been asking. No, Pa. By Act of Parliament, September 2nd next shall be called as ever September 2nd, but the day after will be known as September 14th, and then all will go on consecutive as before. But 'twill really be September 3rd. The 3rd by the old style, aye, but everyone will be using the new. Then what of the days between? Macclesfield takes them away and declares they never were, with a baffled truculence in his fizz that made Mason equally as anxious to comfort the distress it too clearly signalled as to avoid the shouting it too often promised. We can call days whatever we like. Give them names, George Day, Charles Day, or numbers, so long as everyone's clear about what they're to be called. Aye, son, but what's become of the 11 days? And do you even know? You're telling me they're just gone? Would he not give this up? The shins of both men began to prickle with unmediated memories of violent collisions between leather and bone. Cheer ye, Pa, for there's a bright side. We'll arrive instantly at the 14th, gaining 11 days that we didn't have to live through, nor be marked by, nor age at all in the course of. We'll be 11 days younger than we would have been. Are you daft? Won't it make my next birthday be here that much sooner? That's 11 days older, idiot. Older. No, said Mason. Or, wait a moment. I've people asking me what Macclesfield will do with the days he is stealing, and why is Dr. Bradley helping him? And I tell them, my son will know, and I did hope you'd know. I'm thinking. He now began to quiz himself insomniac with this, wondering if his father had struggled thus with Mason's own earlier questions about the world. He invested precious sleep in the question and saw not a farthing's dividend. Mr. Swivet, approaching a facial lividity that would alarm a physician, were one present, now proclaims, not only did they insult the God-given structure of the year, they also put us on Catholic time, French time. We've been fighting France all our lives, all our fathers' lives. France is the enemy eternal. Why be ruled by their calendar? Because their philosophers and ours, explains Mr. Hailstone, are all in league with those in other states of Europe, and the Jesuits too, among them possessing machines, powders, rays, elixirs and such, none less than remarkable, one now and then so daunting that even the agents of kings must stay their hands. Time, you see, says the landlord, is the money of science, isn't it? The philosophers need a time common to all, as traders do, a common coinage, suggesting as well an interest in those events which would occur in several parts of the globe at the same instant, like in the book of Revelations, like the transit of Venus, Mr. Mason? Yeah. Mason, jumping in surprise. Thank ye, sir. I never heard that one before. Mr. Mason, appeals Mr. Swivet, you worked beside Dr. Bradley at Greenwich. Did the doctor never bring the matter up? Weren't you personally curious? The George is clearly the wrong place to be tonight. No easier than at Bradley's bedside. So remains he stunned at having been sent away, and with such unspeakable coldness. Yet the spirited expedition into the deserts of idiocy Mr. Swivet now proposes may be just the way for Mason to evade for a bit the whole subject of Bradley's dying without ever resolving what yet lies between them. A gleam more malicious than merry creeps into his eyes. Years before my time, though of course one was bound to hear things. Producing his pipe, pouring claret into his cup and reclining in his chair. Aye, the infamous conspiracy against the 11 days. Kept sequestered, as they say, by the younger Macclesfield, interned, not as to space, but rather time. 'Twas in that schizochronic year of 52 that Macclesfield became president of the Royal Society, continuing so for 12 more years, till his unfortunate passing. Among the mobility, the post was seen as a shameless political reward from the Walpole gang for his theft of the people's time and certain proof of his guilt. My father required but 4 years as Earl of Macclesfield to bring the name down, he complained to Bradley around the time the bill was in committee. Descending through impeachment, through confinement in the Tower, into a kind of popular attainder, for the people are now all too ready to believe me a thief as well. Would that I might restore to them their days, and be done. Throw them open the gates of Sherborne Castle, lay on barrels of ale and sides of beef, appear upon a battlement with mystical machines, solemnly set back 264 hours the hands of the castle clock, and declare again the day its ancient numbering, to general huzzas. Alas, with all that, who in God's name among them could even want 11 days more? Of what? The further chance that something else dreadful will happen in a life already of unbearable misfortune? Yet we are mortal, whispered Bradley. Would you spit, my lord, truly upon 11 more days? He laughed carefully. His eyes, ordinarily protuberant, were lately shadowed and cowled. Macclesfield regarded his employee, for they were master and servant in this as in all else, briefly, before resuming. My people are from Leek, in Staffordshire. For a while during the summer, the sun sets behind one edge of Cloud Hill, reappears upon the other side, and sets again. I grew up knowing the sun might set twice. What are 11 missing days to me? Bradley, distracted, forgot to laugh at this pretty excursion. What happened when you discovered the rest of the world accustomed to seeing it set but once, my lord? Macclesfield stared vacantly, his face gone in the instant to its own commissioned portrait, a response to unwelcome speech perfected by the class to which he yet aspired. Bradley might never have spoken. Below them, the lamps were coming on in the taverns. The wind was shaking the plantations of bare trees, the river ceasing to reflect as it began to absorb the last light of the day. They were out in Greenwich Park, walking near Lord Chesterfield's house. The autumn was well advanced, the trees gone to pen strokes and shadows and crippled plexity, bathed in the declining light. A keen wind followed about them. Down the hillside, light in colours of the hearth was transmitted by window panes more or less optically true. Hounds barked in the forest. Bradley was 59 that year. Macclesfield 4 years younger, calling him James this, James that. The older man was in perpetual bad health, did not hunt, ride, nor even fish, had married foolishly, had been entirely purchased long ago, aberration, nutation, star catalogue and all, though he had denied it successfully to himself. Everyone lies, James, each appropriate to his place in the chain. We who rule must tell great lies, whilst ye lower down need only lie a little bit. This is yet another thankless sacrifice we make for you, so that you may not have to feel as much remorse as we do, as we must. Part of noblesse oblige, as you might say. Is it so strange that the son of a lawyer who bought and then destroyed in shame a once honourable title should seek refuge in stargazing? They betray us not, nor ever do they lie. They are pure methesis. Unless they be moons or planets possessing diameter, each exists as but a dimensionless point, a simple pair of numbers, right ascension and declination, numbers that you men of science are actually paid out of the purses of kings to find. Fret not, my lord, replied Bradley, as if he were being paid to soothe the patron. Among brother lenses, all are welcome. Can you warrant that you did just not insult me, James? Bradley imagined he caught a certain playfulness of tone, but was unsure how much to wager upon that. I have listened to my lord insult himself for the last hour. Why should I wish to join in, especially considering the respect I hold him in? As a lensman only, of course. You make it difficult. They trudged through fallen oak leaves that sailed and stirred about their calves. They smelled chimney smoke, blasted autumn, invader of old bones. Here, Mason explains to a small audience at the George, purely, as who might say, dangerously, was time that must be denied its freedom to elapse, as if, for as long as the days lay frozen, mortality itself might present no claims. The folk for miles around could sense a presence, something altogether too frightening for any of the regular servants at Sherborne Castle to go near. Macclesfield had to hire strangers from afar, far to the east. The Indies, China, Stepney. His lordship, as Mason relates, required a people who lived in quite another relation to time, one that did not, like our own, hold at its heart the terror of time's passage, far more preferably indifference to it, pure and transparent as possible. The verbs of their language no more possessing tenses than their nouns, case endings, for these people remained as careless of sequences in time, as disengaged from subjects, objects, possession, or indeed anything which might, among Englishmen, require a preposition. As to gender, well, dear me, but that's something else again entirely, isn't it? Aye, and damn if it isn't. Howbeit, through the good offices of an Hungarian intermediary, protest from all in the company. Hey, genders? Very well, of genders they have three. Male, female, and the third sex no one talks about. Dead. What then, you may be curious to know, are the emotional relations between male and dead, female and dead? Dead and dead. Eh? Just so. What of love triangles? Do they automatically become quadrilaterals, with death no longer in as simple a way parting us, no longer the barrier nor sanction that it was? What becomes of marriage vows? How must we redefine being faithful? By which he means, so the Reverend, who was there in but a representational sense, ghostly as an imperfect narrative to be told in futurity, would have guessed, that Rebecca's visits at St. Helena, if sexual, were profoundly like nothing he knew, whilst she assumed that he well understood her obligations among the dead, and would respond ever as she wished. Yet how would he, being allowed no access to any of those millioned dramas among the dead? They were like the stars to him, unable to project himself among their enigmatic gatherings. He could but observe through a mediating instrument, the many-lensed Rebecca. Through the efforts of Count Dixon, in any case, a band of these aliens, the size of a regiment, were presently arrived in Gloucestershire. Bless us! Nothing like it since the Druids. They marched in through the castle gates, playing upon enormous chimes of crystal antimony, and trumpets fashioned from the bones of ancient species, found lying upon the great unbroken plain where they dwell, their music proceeding not straight ahead like an English marching tune, but rather wandering unpredictably with no clear beginning nor end. Uniforms? A sturdy sort of armour, head to toe, woven of the low desert shrubs of their land. Military chaps, imposing, as you'd say. Asiatic pygmies, Mason says, actually. Yet, despite their stature, any mob would have thought twice about challenging their right to colonize the 11 days. Their commission, that is, their charter, if you like, directed them to inhabit the days, yet not to allow the time to elapse. They were expected to set up households, farms, villages, mills, an entire plantation in time. And say, do they live there yet, or rather then? And have any of the days elapsed, despite these enigmatic jailers? Now and then a traveller's report. Geographically, they're by now diffused everywhere obedient to the new Act style. Some to America, some out to India. Vacant India. Returned unto wild dogs and serpents, the breeze off the Hooghly, blowing past the empty doorways of a certain black hole. And wherever they are, temporarily, 11 days to the tick behind us, 'tis all in Eden there, lads, and only they inhabit it, they and their generations. 'Tis their great saga, the pygmies' discovery of Great Britain. Arrived they cannot say how nor care. They sleep in our beds, live in our rooms, eat from our dishes what we have left in the larders, finish our bottles, play with our cards, and upon our instruments squat upon our necessaries, the more curious of them ever pursuing us, as might historians of times not yet come, by way of the clues to our lives that they find in objects we have surrendered to the day, or been willing to leave behind at its end. To them a mystery nation, relentlessly being British, a vast hive of ghosts, not quite vanished into futurity. Then, and recall Mason's fizz but precariously earnest, where you were 11 days ago. Saw you anyone really foreign about? Very short, perhaps, even oriental in aspect? Well, yes, now that you, recalls Mr. Hailstone. Right out in Parliament Street it was, a strange little fellow, head shaved everywhere, red damask robes with gold embellishments, what could in the right circs be called a fashionable hat, a sort of squat obelisk, and is cryptically inscribed. Not that I paid all that much attention, of course, though a good number of citizens themselves, by way of brims and cockades displaying headgear messages aplenty, were loitering about, trying to decipher this stranger's hat. The odd thing was he didn't pay any of us the least heed. Imagine, Stroud macaronis poked at him with their sticks. Irish servants passed leprechaun remarks. Respectable matrons of the town ventured to chuck him under the chin. All reported a surprising transparency, some a many-coloured twinkling about the fringes of his figure. Of course, for you saw him as he was, in the relative vacuum of his plantation, whilst he, for his part, believed you all to be prankish ghosts he must not acknowledge, fearing who knows what mental harm. You haunted each other. Thus, from the cargo of days, having broken 11, precious, untranspired, for his masters to use as they will, having withal conspired to deliver our land unto these strange alien pygmies, stands Bradley tonight before the Lords as Caesars, his soul in the gravest peril. Let us pray. The Reverend Cromorne proceeds to what we in the trade call drop the transom, voice falling to a whisper, eyelids fluttering over eyeballs of increased albedo. Do excuse me, I'm talking to God here. Be with ye as soon as we're done. Is Mason going to get angry and into a fight? Will he stand and announce, "This is none of God's judgment, to be offended as gravely by calendar reform as by mortal sin requires a meanness of spirit quite out of the reach of any known deity, though well within the resources of Stroud, it seems," and walk out through their stunned ranks to the embrace of the night and never enter the place again? No. He buys everyone a pint instead, and resigns himself to seeking out his family tomorrow. Those sure agents of melancholy, they sooner or later feel regretful for it, whilst regret is just the sort of sentiment that regular life at the George depends on having no part in. The landlord is kind and forthright. The ale as good as any in Britain. The defenestration of the clothiers in 56 has inscribed the place forever in legend. And good eggs far outnumber bad hats. Yet so dismal have these late hours in it been for Mason, as to make him actually look forward to meeting his relations again. End of chapter.